Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Monday, March 14th, kicking off my favorite week of the year. We have a great lineup on today's show. We're going to get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Bharat Jogi, who is the Director of Security and Threat Research over at Qualys. They talk about two vulnerabilities that Qualys recently uncovered. One is a 12-year-old Linux vulnerability in PolicyKit, and another is a very easy-to-exploit vulnerability in Snap, which is a universal application packaging and distribution system developed for Ubuntu. So Bharat and Alan talk about the two vulnerabilities, how Qualys uncovered them, and what folks need to do to mitigate the vulnerabilities in their applications and their systems. Open source vulnerabilities, we hear about them all the time, so please check this conversation out so you don't get affected by it. After that, Alan speaks with Ben Siegelman, who is the GM of Lightstep over at ServiceNow, and RJ Janendra, who is the VP and GM for Emerging Business over at ServiceNow. And they talk about a new application that Lightstep has. It is called Lightstep Incident Response. And really what it does is move Lightstep beyond simply observability, actually creating a differentiated portfolio for application development. It's a great new technology, and Ben and RJ talked to Alan about how it's really kind of evolving the Lightstep portfolio over at ServiceNow and how customers are going to benefit from it. Good stuff there. After that, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast. This is a very, very interesting conversation that host Mike Jones has with Colonel Oren Eitan, who is the CEO of Odix. He's also the former head of the IDF Information Security Unit, as well as Yehuda Sunshine, who is the chief evangelist and head of PR over at Odix. They talk about a lot of the world events that are currently happening and how everybody needs to become much more cyber aware than they are. Geopolitics and the implications of governments using cyber attacks as a preemptive means of attack is growing in conversation among a lot of folks in the security space. And so Mike and Colonel Eitan and Yehuda Sunshine both talk, all three of them talk about really whether this is a reality, something that we definitely need to be on the lookout more for, or if it's basically bluster. But I have a feeling it is closer to reality than we think, folks. It's a great conversation. As always with the Haunted Hacker, you want to check that one out. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2022 virtual event. This one features Harpreet Singh, who is the co-founder and co-CEO at Launchable. He has a presentation called Picking the Right Battles to Wage in Your DevOps Transformations. So he takes a look at the DevOps testing and AI landscape to see how data, machine learning, and test automation can help teams in 2022. Obviously, there's going to be some COVID and that impact on people and remote work. So that's going to be a big part of his presentation as well. And it all kind of folds together in one nice little ball. Testing AI and DevOps. It's good stuff there. It's a great presentation, too, so you definitely want to check it out. After that, I'm back with the news headlines, and then I have a great conversation with Karen Wurstel, who is the senior cybersecurity strategist over at VMware, and we talk about smart cities, and specifically smart city cybersecurity, why security is not being baked into smart city infrastructure technology from the beginning, what the major vulnerabilities are, and how we can go forward from here. We were talking about smart cities, I would say as far back about 10 years ago, about how smart technology is going to really revolutionize infrastructure and the way governments and public infrastructures interact with consumers and vice versa. Kind of took a back seat over the last couple of years because of COVID, but now smart cities are becoming a greater part of the conversation again. But I don't think the cybersecurity aspect is kept up. So Karen and I talk about what organizations can do when they are implementing smart city technology to make sure that their cybersecurity is top notch as well. It's a great conversation. After that, I've got the webinar's preview, and then we have the View with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Vijoy Pandey, who is the Vice President of Emerging Technologies and Incubation over at Cisco. They discuss why automation has become an absolute IT necessity. I second that thought 100%. It's a great conversation. Vijoy is always fun to have a discussion with, and this is no exception as well. And it's a great, great conversation. And that is today's lineup. It is super good today, and I'm very, very excited to present it to you. And we are going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. First up, we have a conversation between Alan and Bharat Jogi, who is the Director of Security and Threat Research over at Qualys. They talk about two vulnerabilities, open source vulnerabilities that Qualys recently discovered. One is a 12-year-old Linux vulnerability in Policy Kit, and another is an easy-to-exploit vulnerability in Snap, which is a universal application packaging and distribution system developed for Ubuntu. Bharat and Alan talk about the vulnerabilities, what impact it has on organizations, and what they can do to mitigate the vulnerability in their systems. Great conversation. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview. My guest for this interview is Mr. Bharat Jogi. Bharat, of course, is with our friends at Qualys. Hey Bharat, welcome to Techstrong TV. How are you?
I'm doing great, Alan. Thank you for inviting me to this show.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you on. So, Bharat, look, our audience is very familiar with Qualys, one of the leaders in the cybersec, infosec space, but they're probably not as familiar with you. So why don't you, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of your personal story. What's your position at Qualys? What do you do?
Sure, Alan. My name is Bharat Jogi. I'm the Director for Vulnerability and Threat Research at Qualys. And basically what my team does on a daily basis is, we are constantly involved into identifying, reviewing source code for open source technologies and trying to find more vulnerabilities that could really impact customers and a lot of, the InfoSec community in general. So that's what my team does on a daily basis. Along with that, obviously, we keep up with all the, tsunami of vulnerabilities that get released on a daily basis. So essentially, that's what my team does. We are pretty much spread out across geography, and we try to find, the best security researchers and best talent that we can add to the team.
Absolutely. And, this is one of the big sort of evolutionary developments that I've seen over, let's say, the last 10 years, which is, it used to be companies like Qualys, for instance, that had a great vulnerability scanning and patching and management solutions. What they were basically, they didn't do the underlying research themselves discovering these vulnerabilities. They counted on, this sort of this far-flung network of security researchers that would find vulnerabilities, and then there was the whole process of getting a vulnerability into MITRE or into the CVC and having a CVC number assigned to it and a criticality and all of that stuff. And then a company like a Qualys would say, okay, we need to have a scan for this vulnerability. We got to have what the right patch is for it, how to mitigate it until a patch is put forth, right? But now, we've kind of jumped the shark a little bit, where companies like Qualys, they've got teams like yours out here finding research, finding vulnerabilities, sort of first instance, if you will, what we used to call 0 days and stuff like that. You're finding the vulnerabilities themselves. How long has the research team been in operation there? Do you know?
So I think the Qualys research team for vulnerabilities has been operational since the day Qualys was born. Essentially, that's how Qualys really, came in. There were researchers who were doing vulnerability research, and from there it started to expand and became a product. So I would say the research team, the core research team, has been ever since Qualys was born. And that is what we call it, that research has always been in the Qualys DNA. And I still recall when I joined Qualys back in 2009, we were just a handful of people, trying to do as much as we can. But along the way, I think our mission, our core values was always the same. We always want to find quality vulnerabilities before the bad actors can find it, and basically help our customers and the InfoSec community in general to, be ahead of the bad guys. So I recall back in 2009, we were just a handful of people doing that. From there, we have moved. Today, we have a team of almost 45 people doing this on a daily basis. So yeah, it's been a fun journey. And, along this way, we picked up as many jewels as we can. I'm very proud that, today we have always concentrated on finding quality bugs over quantity. And that is what, if you see some of our reports that we publish around security advisories, especially that we publish, like real InfoSec researchers really do appreciate them, because we tend to have this old school side of doing stuff, and we give as much as detail that is needed, which I think a lot of companies today are not giving that kind of visibility to the researchers, that hey, this is the vulnerability, this is how we found it, and this is our way of giving back to the community. We have certainly learned a lot from the InfoSec community. We obviously review a lot of these findings that other researchers do, and this is our sort of way of giving back to the InfoSec community.
Absolutely, and look, on top of all this, you guys are doing great work, right? I mean, there's a lot of threat research out here in the world today, and the Qualys team is doing more, their fair share. Recently, your team has identified at least two that I want to talk about today. Two very significant vulnerabilities, bugs, whatever you want to call them, that, have a pretty big effect, pretty widespread effect. I wanted to talk about them a little bit, and in talking about them, Bharat, without giving away, company secrets, let's educate the audience about how a research team finds these bugs, right? How did your team come across it, and what what the bugs are, and I think people will be fascinated to know that.
Sure. So, and in 2022, we found two critical vulnerabilities. The first disclosure that we did was what we dubbed as PwnKit. Now, this is a vulnerability that affects all Linux distributions in their default configuration. So, and this bug was actually introduced back in 2009. So all these years, last 12, 13 years, this bug was hiding in the plain sight, and basically it affected all Linux distributions in their default configuration. And it basically gave an attacker full root privileges on any Linux distribution. So, and obviously the attack surface, the threat surface for this vulnerability is extremely huge. And basically, the most important thing to note about this vulnerability was that we were aware at the time when we did the disclosure. We obviously engaged in the responsible disclosure, engaging all the vendors, so on and so forth. And we were aware that this vulnerability would get exploited very soon. Like, we did not drop any exploits, etc., but we were aware. And as soon as we did the disclosure, within a matter of hours, researchers were able to review that vulnerability and create an exploit for that. So within, I think the first time I saw something on Twitter, somebody posting about it, was within like 3 hours. So within 3 hours, that vulnerability got, and we essentially, make it a point that, when there's something like this that we are dropping, we are informing the community that, hey, please take this thing seriously, because we definitely believe exploits for this could be created. So that was the first vulnerability that we disclosed in 2022. The second one that we disclosed was in February. We named it "Oh Snap, More Lemmings," and that was again a privilege escalation vulnerability, giving attackers a full root privilege access on a Linux distribution. Now, this vulnerability was not as ubiquitous as the PwnKit, because the OSNAP vulnerability only affected Ubuntu distributions in their default configurations. Now, obviously, if you have snapd, etc., installed on other distributions, they also become vulnerable. But by default, it affects only Ubuntu distributions. But Ubuntu is a fairly popular distributions. I think from the numbers that we saw, there are around like 40 million distributions, Ubuntu distributions in use. So yeah, overall, very proud of, the vulnerabilities that we disclosed. I'm very happy that it was also very well received by the InfoSec community, given that we tend to provide as much as details around the vulnerability. Our advisories are very much detailed, so that, the folks and the InfoSec community and the researchers can also, understand our thought processes and also learn something about, the learnings that we did.
Absolutely, and congratulations to the team. Let's look at that a little bit. The first bug, you said, has been around since at least 2009.
Yeah.
But no one had put out an exploit that we know of until after you had done your responsible disclosures. How do we know, though? I mean, was there, how do we know there wasn't already an exploit out there? That maybe it's a government agency, maybe it's an enemy or, an adversarial government agency or gang or something, right? It just seems to me, if this is a bug that's been around since 2009, how do we, we can't be sure that there hasn't already been an exploit on these things.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, but what happens is, typically in my experience, when something is getting actively exploited, some way or another, this information would surface. Now, obviously, this is not to say that, that we would always get that, but I tend to feel from the experience that I have dealing with this kind of exploits and, this vulnerabilities being breaking out, that if some things are actively being exploited, some way or another, we live in this hyper-connected world. We have various logs, etc., and, that are being monitored, etc. So if an exploit is being actively exploited and it's being used in large at campaigns at a large scale, people would tend to somehow this information would surface and people would get their eyes to it. This is not to say that none of there would obviously be exploits that happening very covertly and they have not surfaced. But I like to believe, given the world that we live in, that if there is active, if at least if the exploits are being leveraged in a wide scale attack, they would surface sooner, if not later.
Right. You would hope, and you think, right?
And that's what we can hope for, yeah.
Right.
So look, it's only March, whatever it is, March 1st, March 2nd. It's a busy year already. Yes. I mean, certainly finding one major vulnerability a month. I hope it's not that bad a year for us, right? But let's talk about, how does a team, even, what'd you say, there's about 40 people on the team now?
Yes. 45.
How, a team of 45 people, how do you find these vulnerabilities? Because we're looking for vulnerabilities where there is no exploit that we know of necessarily, right? Yes. So it's not like we could observe someone, an incident and say, oh, this is how they got in, right? We're looking for, truly 0 days, ones where people don't know of. How do you find them?
So we like most of the vulnerabilities that we have found has been through thorough source code audit. It's I would say a slow process, but it is a short way of finding very quality bugs. There are we employ other techniques like fuzzing, etc., in order to discover more vulnerabilities. But our best research, our best vulnerabilities, and the most complicated vulnerabilities that we have found are coming from doing the tons of source code audit, and that's what the research team primarily focus on. They do a ton of source code audit of the open source technologies and try to uncover, quality bugs. So just to give an example, obviously source code audit is something that we continuously do, but often sometimes we get into this more where we want to push the boundaries. So I'll take an example of a vulnerability that we found in 2017. We called it as stack clash. So it's not that it was that vulnerability that we found, obviously, again, affected all Linux distributions, so on and so forth. But, folks knew about this vulnerability in theoretical per se that, yes, something like stack clash could happen. But, up until the point that we disclosed the stack clash vulnerability, those attack techniques were always deemed to be theoretical. So we often, take those opportunities, to go above and beyond and see, to push the limits to say, hey, yes, this is something that the industry knew for, many years. But let's take that and let's see what we can add to it. And, if we can create a practical means of exploiting the vulnerability, which are considered just theoretical until that point. So we want to, push those boundaries as well. That's the same thing that happened with, the OSNAP vulnerability. Like Snap is something which we were aware has a very defensive style of coding. It uses all the different, latest exploit thwarting technologies so that, even if you can find the vulnerability, you will be able to exploit it. But our researchers basically, decided to, still push the boundaries, and we were able to successfully exploit vulnerabilities in Snap.
Very good. Very good. Parat, so I'm going to imagine Qualys customers are probably getting sort of a threat research feed from the Qualys team, keeping them up to date on the latest research that you guys are doing. But for the general public, maybe, who are not yet a Qualys customer, but wants to kind of check in on Qualys research, how would they go about it? Is there a web page or a section of the Qualys site that is open to not just, paying Qualys customers, but to the public at large?
Yeah. So what we have a page called as research.qualys.com, and we essentially put all our research material there. Whatever vulnerabilities that we found, how we found it to some extent. Also, like after a reasonable time of disclosure of the vulnerability, we also create like exploit code for them for the vulnerabilities that we have. So we publish that. So we tend to do as much as, as I mentioned earlier, the goal of research is not just so that it is integrated into the product, but we also, this is our way of giving back to, all the learnings that we have found from the InfoSec community. So this is our way of, giving it back to the InfoSec community. So this, for the research.qualys.com, you'll see all the research that Qualys has done. Also on blogs.qualys.com, we provide a ton of information of how you might be aware of the recent CISA guidance on with the Russia and Ukraine crisis. So we provide a lot of material around those on blogs.qualys.com. Also, what we do on a monthly basis, I, along with some of our, senior product management from people from product management teams, we do a monthly review on vulnerabilities and patches, where we basically discuss all the top vulnerabilities that were disclosed and what customers can essentially do to take remediation actions for them. So we do tend to engage in a lot of this outreach and sharing as much information as we have with the community.
Got it. Good stuff. Bharat, I told you this was going to be 15 minutes. We're over 20. I apologize. But you know what? I wanted people to get a flavor. I mean, we all see this researcher, that researcher found the bug, blah, blah. I don't know, for people who aren't necessarily in this end of the business, if they really understand what a threat research team is about, what they do day to day, how do they find these bugs, and what do they do once they do. So thanks for coming on and enlightening us.
Sure, Alan.
Keep up the great work.
Here.
I got to be honest with you. I hope you don't continue finding a major bug every month, right? Let's hope things are tightening up. But, stay on the job. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks a lot, Alan. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this show.
My pleasure.
Bharat Jogi, Qualys Threat Research Team here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with another guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we are back. Next up, Alan is speaking with Ben Siegelman, who is the general manager of Lightstep over at ServiceNow, and RJ Janendra, who's the vice president and general manager for emerging business over at ServiceNow. They talk about a brand new offering for Lightstep. It's called Lightstep Incident Response, which takes Lightstep beyond simply observability to actually be a differentiated portfolio for application development in general. It's a great new technology, and it's a great conversation. So let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Techstrong TV segment today. We've got some breaking news I want to bring to you, and I'm really happy to be joined by two gentlemen who are going to tell you the news. I've had the pleasure of having them on before. They're two really bright guys from ServiceNow. Let me introduce you to Ben Siegelman and RJ Janendra from ServiceNow. RJ, I think I left out an N somewhere in that second or third syllable, but we'll let you correct it. I'm going to ask you to go first. RJ, introduce yourself to the audience.
Hey, Alan, good to see you again. And you got it right. RJ Janendra. I'm a VP and GM at ServiceNow, unlocking product-led growth at the company. It's great to be here.
It's good to see you again. And of course, RJ, you're general manager, but the portfolio you are GM with includes observability. I believe it includes value stream as well, yeah?
So ServiceNow does have offerings for value stream management, which brings together a number of different product lines. Our IT business management, which we recently rebranded as Service Portfolio Management, SPM. That's one. The second is it also brings in elements from DevOps and ITSM offerings to provide an end-to-end value stream management. But I'm here today to talk about Lightstep Instant Response. That's the product line that we've been building out for a little while now, and ready to launch here today.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about Lightstep. Got to have Ben here. Ben, welcome. Why don't you give the folks a little bit of your background?
Yeah, thanks, Alan, for having us. So I'm Ben Stiglman. I was one of the co-founders at Lightstep and was the CEO up through last year when we were acquired into ServiceNow. ServiceNow wasn't willing to let me remain the CEO of ServiceNow after the acquisition. So now I'm also a VP and GM along with RJ. Lightstep's brand and certainly our products and many aspects of our culture have actually been intentionally retained as part of the acquisition. And the brand has actually been expanded to be a multi-product brand, which is what we're talking about today. Most of my day-to-day is spent, doing a combination of thinking about the product vision for observability specifically within Lightstep, as well as the longer-term strategy within ServiceNow and what we can do for our customers by unifying the world of ServiceNow with the world of high volume customer facing applications that Lightstep tends to play in. So.
Absolutely. I think the ServiceNow team already has a pretty good guy in it, CEO. But hey.
When I talked with Bill McDermott during the acquisition, I told him he had my condolences for being a CEO of a much larger company. I knew how stressful it was for Lightstep, so I can only imagine what it's like for him. But he's a fantastic guy.
Absolutely. Look, yes, until you've been a CEO, and I don't care whether it's a really, really big company or a really small company, it's a lot. Anyway, though, guys, let's talk Lightstep. Observability. Let's talk about the expansion. Just to level set things, you both referenced it. Lightstep was one of the leaders in this observability revolution or wave that we saw overtake the industry, let's say in the last 3-4 years. Certainly, it really caught fire. Lightstep, Ben and your two co-founders, I believe, all came from Google and really in many ways helped initiate the whole observability revolution there. And then, leveraging open source and working with open source, open telemetry, etc. Really built quite a community and following. ServiceNow, one of the most dynamic companies in our industry, recognized this and made Lightstep and observability an important part of the ServiceNow offering. But from what I'm hearing and reading between the lines is, why stop there, right? There's more. There's more that the marriage of ServiceNow's know-how, market intelligence and just, skill set, and the Lightstep platform can do more, and today marks a significant expansion of that. So you're both GMs. Who wants to go first to talk about what this new expansion is?
So I can talk a little bit about what the expansion is, and kind of, Ben can, I think, talk through sort of, why it makes a ton of sense of what we're doing. So the thing that we see that's happening in the market is just, the amount of investment going into what's been called digital transformation. it's just increasing significantly. And I think by some accounts, IDC forecast, it's like going to be something like north of $10 trillion cumulative by 2025. And so, what Mark Andreessen said a long time ago, I think it has come to pass, which is every company is a software company. And increasingly, with the adoption of cloud, organizations are prioritizing cloud operations, and software development teams, they build and they run these millions of new customer-facing, revenue-generating applications and services. And so from that perspective, the SREs and developers who really are responsible for keeping applications reliable and resilient, and they really start impacting the business outcome. And so, that's where if you have incidents then that occur, like maybe it's a bug or some sort of an outage or kind of poor performance, it has a major impact on revenue, on customer loyalty, on the brand perception. And so that's why we see an opportunity in the market to introduce a new offering around incident response, which really leverages the power of the ServiceNow platform, but then it brings together the observability capabilities that Lightstep has into sort of a holistic offering that we can bring into market to help customers become more proactive and more effective in addressing issues. Right? Ben, do you want to add to that in terms of kind of your perspective from an observability side?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the way I'd explain it is so observability, Alan, I would agree with what you said. It's a wave, but it's a very confusing, diffuse, it's a body of water right now that can be hard to kind of wrap your head around. And you frankly have a lot of what I would call legacy observability companies trying to take what they have and call it observability because that's easier than reforming it. So it might be helpful to suspend just one very quick 30-second snippet talking about what observability actually is architecturally. You have some layer at the bottom of integrations and data acquisition. You mentioned OpenTelemetry earlier. The Lightstep Instant Response product that we're announcing today also has an integration ecosystem built around it, but you have sort of the acquisition of data. You have some kind of data platform where you store that, which I'm not going to talk about in detail right now, but I think is an interesting topic, slightly far afield. And then you have workflow built on top of that, and that's where the actual value is delivered. A lot of the conversation around observability today is that you have a silo for your metric system, a silo for your logging system, maybe you tack on some kind of tracing or APM system, and then you integrate them in the browser. And then you also have this incident response thing over there that's some other vendor. And it does not make any sense. Like when we talk with our customers, the three things they are prioritizing are, overall performance, velocity, and actually most importantly, incident response and time to resolution. It's like the most important thing for observability. And then you have not just a separate tab, but like a separate product to do incident management, incident response, which is not sensible from a workflow standpoint. So for the brand, this is a very obvious and natural thing to have incident response and observability integrated into a single experience. I mean, especially incident response where seconds matter, and a context switch like that is very expensive. So anyway, that's why this makes a ton of sense to us. It goes right at the heart of the MPTR problem, to have a single platform to manage the full life cycle of incident management on the observability side and on the incident response side.
Absolutely. And Ben, to your point, well, first of all, I think, you call them legacy observability vendors. Really, they're they're APM, application performance management vendors, or who
or infrastructure monitoring vendors, more to the
right, or infrastructure. I mean,
it's not
everyone loves a good name.
Right. Company I had started, we had come out with a product that Gartner later named the category NAC, Network Access Control. We had some stupid name for it before, but Gartner, did that. And all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, all these people who were doing totally different things started calling what they do NAC. Very similar thing happened with observability, right? Anyone who was doing monitoring, all of a sudden was observability. But I think also to your point was that observability got siloed into just observing. Almost by definition, observability is not actionable. Right? It was almost like, it's almost like observability is a passive word, where actionable is an active word.
You're exactly. It's a very good point. And if you go, I mean, I tend to be a little academic, but I think this is an interesting point. Observability really originates from control theory in the 1960s, and it was this smaller, kind of lesser cousin to controllability, which is kind of what you're talking about. Controllability is really the thing that matters. That if you can control a system, like there are scientific ways of talking about that, mathematical ways of talking about that, and to a certain extent, you can think of incident response as being the controllability side of what we're talking about here, right? It's like we're making the insights from observability actionable with the incident response product, and that's a really important part of actually closing the loop on the control theory of modern distributed systems. Like it's a great insight that you're making, Alex.
Yep, thank you. Every once in a while, even the blind squirrel finds something, right? But so RJ, let's talk about this. So ServiceNow is not a trivial sized company. To decide that, you didn't really have an incident response solution in market prior to this, as far as I know. I'm not an expert on everything ServiceNow, but I'm not aware of it. And to say, okay, we are going to build this in as the logical next step in the Lightstep platform, just the inertia sometimes in an organization your size, it's hard, it's difficult. Let's hear kind of, from your point of view, what it took to make that happen, turn that ship.
Yeah, so Alan, we actually do have capabilities in the ServiceNow platform through our IT service management and IT operation management products around things like, we have core technology around event correlation, being able to take large scale number of events from the observability tools, bring them in and understand what those events mean. And we also do have functionality in ITSM around notifying the right person. But really, the ServiceNow technology, we have great adoption with IT organizations, right? In a large number of customers. But what we're seeing really is, as our customers are going through this digital transformation, they're sort of reorganizing, and the product teams that are out there are the ones that are starting to adopt these technologies around observability. And that's why we felt that we wanted to bring an offering into market that could be adopted by teams, right? So the entire experience for Lightstep Incident Response is as a modern SaaS application. If you're a developer on the team, and what we're finding right now is a lot of our initial customers are smaller companies. They are early, growth stage companies that are post-revenue. They have customers. They want to make sure that their systems are highly available for them. And so what we're finding is that they can come online, they can sign up, and within a few seconds get access to the system, start using it, and if they see value, then they can swipe the credit card and they're off to the races. So very much a different motion, really suited to how teams out there and smaller companies are adopting technology. And of course, the startups of today are the ones that become the unicorns tomorrow. And so that's what we're doing. That's a little bit different. But for ServiceNow customers, they continue to have those capabilities within the ServiceNow platform.
Excellent. So guys, let's talk, if you don't mind, I got to do a little meat and potatoes here. You guys announced this today. Is it available? When will it be available?
It is available today on lightstep.com. And so we have had the product in the market for a little bit. We did a soft launch earlier last year. And so it's been battle tested, and we have a number of customers that have come online. They're using it in production. And so it is available today. And it doesn't take more than an email to sign up and get going.
And how is it? What's the offering? How is it priced? If you're an existing Lightstep or ServiceNow customer, how do you firing off an email? Yeah, but how do what's this going to set? What's involved here?
Yep. So actually, it isn't a whole lot more complicated than what I just said, which is just as you sign up for a lot of consumer type services online. Developers, SREs can get started with an email. And we do have a couple of different tiers. So we do have a free tier where if you are just getting started and you may have just a couple of services that you're monitoring and kind of addressing issues for with incident management, that's free. Now, if you kind of start scaling up and you have more than 2, that's when the pricing kicks in. And we are taking an innovative approach in terms of pricing, which is it's based on usage. And so we look at the number of active services that a team has, and then we charge by the number of active services, which is very different than some of the other solutions in the market, which charge by the number of developers that you have in the system. And we really think that, we want to align to the value that customers are trying to deliver, which at the end of the day, if you're a developer or if you're an SRE, your goal is to deliver these resilient, reliable services, right? And so we feel that aligning to the services, and no matter whether you want to bring in your whole team or maybe you also want to bring in sort of extended folks into the solution to be able to collaborate and figure out what the problem is. So we didn't want to let the number of seats become an impediment. And we really would sort of like to have our customers drive this notion of service ownership across the entire team, as opposed to be owned by a few key people, because there's a lot of burnout that happens. And so it is a different model. And but after a 30-day free trial, if customers see value and they have these active services, that's when the billing kicks in. It's all done by credit card. So it's fairly streamlined experience.
And I will add that Lightstep Observability experimented with seat pricing several years ago and abandoned it because it's very important for us to deliver value to our customers. And there's nothing quite as frustrating as hearing people say, "Oh, we want to be using this, but we don't want to add another seat license and blah blah blah." I think especially in large organizations for incident response, it's just immensely frustrating to be kind of wanting to use something like sporadically, maybe like once every couple of months, and then being kind of blocked out of the application because of concerns over seat licensing. So with Lightstep Incident Response, there's really no restriction on that. You can have a thousand head engineering organization and put them into the product, and that doesn't change your bill at all. It's really the pricing is more correlated to the value that we believe we're delivering and the resiliency of the services themselves.
Sure. So I got to ask the question. I'm going to ask it of you, Ben. So this is a step, of taking observability down the control, as you mentioned, the control path for full control. What's next?
That's a good question. We're going to move into crypto. No, I'm just kidding. We're not.
Join the club, yeah.
I'm not here to talk about specific products, but directionally for Lightstep as a brand, I think that we see there's an entire ecosystem out there of. I think you can kind of extrapolate from where I was going with the workflows. I think where actually Lightstep and ServiceNow are incredibly similar in our belief in workflows being kind of paramount. And there are a number of other workflows where people have to do a major context switch when they're involved with the work of making reliability and velocity happen for cloud native applications and for customer facing applications. That's kind of a hint as to I think where we're headed with future products, but this certainly isn't the last one. Yeah.
Great, guys. We're way past 15 minutes, but for people who want to go get Lightstep and Lightstep Observability up and running today, where do they go?
www.lightstep.com.
That's what I was looking for, RJ. Hey, gentlemen, Ben, RJ, thanks so much for coming on and breaking this exciting news and new offering from the Lightstep ServiceNow team. Keep us posted. Best of luck with it. It sounds like a winner, and we hope to hear more soon.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, guys. All right, go check it out, lightstep.com. Their new observability and incident response now as part of it from ServiceNow. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we're back. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast. This one, Mike Jones, the host, speaks with Colonel Oren Eitan, who is the CEO of Odix and a former head of the IDF Information Security Unit. He also speaks with Yehuda Sunshine, who's the chief evangelist and head of PR over at Odix. They talk about geopolitics and its implications on cybersecurity and the implications of governments using cyber attacks as a preemptive means of attack. Never before has this been such a relevant topic of conversation. And as always, Mike and his guests hit it out of the park. Very, very important conversation. I do urge you to take a listen. So let's roll it now.
Welcome to the Haunted Hacker podcast, February version 3. This is the third one this month. And today we have good friends of mine that are pretty amazing and have a spectacular background and an awesome company, Odix, and Colonel Oren Eitan and Yehuda Sunshine. So we'll just go ahead and kick it off. So a little bit of news before we start. I'll be speaking for ICE at some point in time. I'm also speaking at a couple other webcasts and Risk 360 coming up. So without further ado, I'll introduce Colonel Oren Eitan and his counterpart, Mr. Sunshine. And how are you guys doing today? And thank you for being on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to have you guys on. So,
thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. You guys are a friend of the podcast, and I always like our conversations. So the reason why we're doing this special version of the podcast today is because of current geopolitical situations and tensions and some of the things that we've seen come out of those situations. Colonel Oren Eitan was part of the IDF, intimate knowledge of, cyber tactics and different things that revolve around geopolitical situations and cyber warfare. A lot of people don't understand the fact that the globe has been engaged in cyber warfare for many years. For a lot, it was in the shadows. A lot wasn't disclosed. We had incidents like Stuxnet. We had incidents where Estonia got attacked. And now just recently, we've seen the Russians using malware and ransomware against the Ukrainian government, and Ukrainian attackers and hacktivists using malware to attack the infrastructure of their own country, pretty much to slow down the train system to keep the Russians from coming in. So I'll open up to you, Dr. Colonel Oren Eitan. Let's talk about your view and kind of your opinion on how the globe is evolving into this more evident cyber warfare.
Yeah. So again, Mike, thanks for having us. It's our pleasure. I think it's a very good point. And when we look globally and we look at the conflicts around the globe, and you mentioned the invasion of Russia to Estonia was one of the milestones that there was what we call the preliminary cyber attack, prior to the physical forces and all the armed forces. And since then, it seems that the cyber warfare took a legit place in conflicts as kind of a preliminary act, or as an act of, in order to warn the other side or in order to send signals to the other side. It still seems, that, it's not shooting weapons. So it's not like physical destruction, even though you can create a lot of damage by, if you stop or control all the traffic lights or all the ships traffic in the harbor and so on. And we experienced and we saw some of these events recently.
Yeah,
so it seems that the cyber attacks and the cyber front had become a part of all conflicts globally, because it also allows to kind of taste the water and to see, you start with this, you see the reactions, you see, you feel your enemy, you feel his capabilities, you feel how he can defend himself if at all. So what we see now, and we see also in the future, that cyber attacks will not only will be the preface for the conflict, for the physical theater, but it will take also a major role during the maneuvers and the physical conflict, because all the new weapons, all the new missiles, they're all guided, they all have sort of, communication back and forth, and they're all vulnerable. They're all computer-based machines, and they're all, all these processes. So it will no longer will be only a kind of a first shot or a first blast of the conflict, but it will be also along the conflict all the time. And we see it happening in front of our eyes, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think for years, though, it's kind of been a in the shadows type work. And a lot of people thought that the feedback that I got when I made my predictions for this year, that we're going to see some geopolitical motivated cyber attacks. Everybody thought that was doom and gloom, and the fact that that's a doomsday scenario, and it doesn't happen like that. But I think that people are starting to see that it's real. And the reason why I focused on that this year is because being in the military and doing signal intelligence, we had the electronic warfare capability. We had that signal intelligence capability, and it only seemed natural to transition from RF and those types of attacks into a more complete and devastating attack with cyber, because everything is connected now. And another, myth that people believe and they just don't understand is the fact that how could the U.S. be involved in something like that? The U.S. does not do that. And
after MK Ultra, how could the U.S. government ever dip their hands in anything? They learned their lesson. Come on.
Exactly. So, it's really funny when I talk to people who are waving the flag and very proud of the fact that their country just defends themselves and defends other people, but they don't understand that in order to not be a victim, in order to not be affected devastatingly by those cyber attacks and by those electronic attacks, you have to play the game. You have to not appear weak and vulnerable. So, of course, the U.S. takes part in those activities. And, we're not innocent. We don't have white gloves. We have to participate in order to defend ourselves as well as our assets and interest overseas, just with any country. So it's a global affair. And I think people are starting to see that, hopefully. You guys have a malware-free file system, right? And the Russians are starting to use ransomware as a weapon. We've heard of it as ransomware as a service, but now we're seeing it used in nation-state attacks. But what are your thoughts on that, and where do you see that
I personally think that nation states attacking hospitals and critical infrastructure with ransomware is just as strategic as a military strike. And as Oren was saying, that it's in some way a preliminary element today. Within the past year and a half, the Iranians attacked the Israeli water supply with a cyber attack. I would say that's beyond a preliminary attack. That's a full-fledged intervention. So I think that it's on those lines, and I think that we have to perceive it in that way. It's no longer possible for it to be on the back burner. It's fully fledged, and because it's integrating with such vital elements that hit not only diverse populations, but when I think about municipalities, I wrote an ebook on municipal cyber risk. They have so many constraints that prevent them from being able to implement an effective strategy against this. And at the same point, they're holding so much valuable data for people's, critical. It's crazy. So I think that having this diverse option to just rain devastation, it doesn't have to be on a level military to military to be able to cause a real major impact. Think about the Colonial Pipeline. If we stop the energy supply, it's going to cause a panic. It's going to increase prices outside of what the reality is. Are we really in a shortage? No. But you can see how over a really short period of time, it's making all these KPIs go completely berserk.
Absolutely. And
I think we should make the distinction between, ransomware as a service. In this case, let's say everyone that have very basic skills can get the ransomware as a service, can run it, can operate it, and, get some gain out of it and make some benefits for. But when you're talking about ransomware as a weapon, then you're talking on a different level, on a state level, on an intelligence entities level. And in this case, we're on a different page. So it's much more sophisticated. You need to have also kind of unique tools and technologies in order to protect yourself and be kind of one step ahead of this, let's say, state hackers that may, penetrate into your network. So I think, on one hand, ransomware as a service become common and many, people use it, but it's still, let's say, it's on a certain level. I'm not saying that it doesn't devastating and it doesn't cause harm and people, make money out of it. But it's a different story when you're talking about ransomware as a weapon, and then it's used in a much more devastating way in critical infrastructures and in way not only to make money, but to get some political points as well. So it's not necessarily making money out of it.
Absolutely. And when you look at Obama, when he was in office, he made the comment that an attack on the infrastructure is an act of war. But yet we've still not seen any kind of motivation or I guess move towards really considering that and really putting that into effect from the U.S. side, which I think if we don't do something soon, if we don't react to those infrastructure attacks, and if we don't actually follow through, then we're going to make ourselves a huge target. And I think that's unfortunate. But, as we saw Israel dealing with Hamas, to me, in my mind, that's the correct way to do it. You lay down the line, you say, hey, look, our infrastructure is part of how we survive. You attack that, that's an act of war. So I think we're going to see eventually that line being drawn globally. And we're going to start seeing that encroachment and the reaction as we saw with Hamas. I hope that doesn't happen.
I'd like to ask you a question here. Do you think that there's going to be a change in the ideas of humanitarian law and cybercrime being able to be seen on the level of, crime against humanity? where you could create something on such a scale in the digital universe that it could cause this destruction similar to what we've seen in cleansing, or something that could cause such destruction to critical infrastructure that it devastates a country and causes this panic.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look back at Chernobyl, right? So Chernobyl was a very unfortunate situation. But can you imagine something like that being spurred by a cyber attack from a nation state? At that point, I think we're going to have to sit back and say, okay, we've looked at this and we've seen it as an act of war, and you've devastated our infrastructure, or you've killed X amount of people with your cyber attack. And I think at that point, we'd be forced to look at it as a humanitarian attack and take measures to combat it. But I think that a lot of people, or a lot of countries, are afraid to take that step because they still see cyber as, a convenience or the way that we live our lives. I don't think they really see it as something that we need to protect to that extent. And the U.S., I think, is guilty of that vision of the cyber world and the cyber warfare theater. What are your thoughts on that? As far as at what point do we converge and say, okay, from now on, this is what's going to happen?
I think globally, not only the US, but other countries think the same, that, cyber attack on critical infrastructure, it's really a signal for an active war. The problem, however, is that sometimes when you experience a cyber attack, you not always know the source of this cyber attack. So let's say that your train system was hacked and you say, well, this is my critical infrastructure. I decide this is an active war, but against who? Who initiated this attack? And, it's not that, if the Hamas shoots some missiles on Israel, so we know it's from there, we can 100% sure that it was shot from the Gaza Strip, and we know how to retaliate. But if a cyber attack happens, we can know and we can trace back, but sometimes it's not 100% sure. If the attack was built in a way, sometimes it's a little bit difficult, sometimes it may be confusing. So I think the declaration is there and is right, as long as you know the real source of these cyber attacks. Once you know that, if the US knows that someone, attack with a cyber attack, one of their critical infrastructure, and for 100% know who was this guy, it's a war. It's an active war. I'm sure they will retaliate in the most powerful way.
Yeah. I wonder what the stomach is, though, because we saw that there was an attack on Afghanistan that killed civilians. There was an intention. There was critical loss. I wonder, as people see that cyber threats are growing, if there's going to be more of a stomach to say we need to take occasionally broader strokes to protect ourselves. And I'm not sure if everybody's willing to make that risk and say, okay, there's going to be a group that we're going to hold accountable that might have the hammer of one of these major governments. It's difficult to say, but then at the same point, I think if we make that parable to military intervention, the governments have no problem kind of checking that box and saying there's going to be somebody that's going to be lost in that gray area, and we just have to make that sacrifice. So I think it's difficult to make that philosophical decision, but it's going to be something that's going to come more into the forefront. What are we going to sacrifice to be able to protect ourselves from this cyber risk?
Absolutely. And I think that another factor that plays into it as well. So in the US, we kind of base political decisions and activities, as far as military response based on the country's temperament and the thoughts of the people. So here's the problem that we face in the US is the fact that a lot of people don't understand that level. They don't understand the kinetics. They don't understand the activity of, using infrastructure against us by cyber means. And that, it's unfortunate, but there's a lot of uneducated people when it comes to that principle. right? And so to get the backing or the country's opinion in that way to make those I guess fronts and to attack based on a cyber attack is going to be very difficult. And then you take a look at leadership in the U.S. and what we've dealt with over the past 4 years and the chaos that's ensued and the tensions here just domestically. That raises another question. Do we have the people's vote? Do we have the trust of the people to take those actions? And I would say right now we're at a really vulnerable state in the U.S. because of our political tensions and because of the distrust for the government. And any act of war based on cyber attack, I think, would raise a lot of questions. And I think the first time that we do that, I think it's going to cause a lot of problems. But if we don't do it soon, and if we don't do it systematically, then I think we're going to become a target of a lot of nation states. And I've even seen, so last year I did a lot of incident response on ransomware, I did 13 in like 60 days. And one of them was very, very interesting to the fact where we knew who the ransomware attackers were and the type of ransomware that was used. But what was interesting was in that same environment, we identified an APT. So it was like they were working together hand in hand. You had the ransomware gangs trying to ransom and get money. But in the background, you had the APT that was sitting quietly and probably collecting intelligence. So we're starting to see that collaboration between nation state and government and ransomware gangs. And it's a natural progression because why not take advantage of those gangs and that criminal activity to carry out your own espionage, right? And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future.
For sure. I mean, I think it's interesting as that third wall breaks down. It's very logical to see these relationships, and I think that it's also the cost of entry. Just like how ransomware as a service, there's so much that needs to go in on the front end to be able to effectively do it. Governments who want to be able to come into this game and say, we have the budget. We have this oil revenue that we would like to spend on this political X. It's very easy to approach one of the ransomware gangs and use this as leverage versus creating the domestic capabilities. But I think what some of the larger nation states, especially the United States, are doing is saying we need to create these homegrown capabilities. We need to create the professionals, and we need to create the private enterprise. I see in Israel we get blasted for it, especially recently. But I think that it's because cyber products are being miscategorized. If you categorize an NSO product as something that's a military weapon, nobody has a problem selling out bullets. And last time I checked, bullets aren't to make friends. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm from Baltimore, so I don't know. But it just seems that this miscategorization of what cybersecurity is and what cyber products can do, if we can realign it, we can change this consciousness and then kind of make it into something where cybersecurity is your lifeblood. Instead of it being this highly technical thing, we're going to turn off the ventilator in your hospital. We're going to make your highway not work. We're going to make it that your car is going to be taken. Your Tesla, unfortunately, is ours. And I think that when it becomes put into context, it's a lot easier for the general population to understand the risk and then to be able to see its impact on the field.
Oh, absolutely. And when you look at just recently in the news in the U.S., the big talk is about Pegasus malware, right? NSO group, we all know that they're very highly skilled, and this malware has made its rounds around the globe. And of course, they blame the NSO group now for everything that happens with Pegasus malware, and they're blaming it. They're accusing the government of using Pegasus, which I'm pretty sure that they are. But again, that's one of those pieces of malware that is weaponized, and every country uses it now. But of course, the blame gets put on NSO group for their creation of it. But really, I mean, we're all kind of guilty because every government's using it now. And I think it's unfortunate that we take something that is that highly skilled and that. I mean, I looked at the code. The code's beautiful, and I have a lot of respect for what they've done with that. But then you take other countries' view of it, and even the U.S.'s view, and they blame NSO, but yet they turn around and we find them using it against citizens. It shocks me that they would use weaponry like that could be used to combat global cyber terrorism, and they use it against their own people. And we're starting to see a lot more of that here in the US, the big tech using government level malware and capabilities to collect on their own people instead of being focused on defending the country and going and combating that type of evil.
There has been internal response to that as well from Google, from Amazon, from the employees saying that, where are we going to draw this line? And Oren has written about it in Forbes that, who's going to be the driving forces of morality and ethics in cybersecurity, and who's going to be able to assume, is this a freedom fighter, a political dissident, a rebel, or a constitutional hero? And it's all up for grabs. And, I think that we can see in the military and the cyber field that based off of that distinction, you make calculated decisions, and how you're going to use it and execute it is something that's very complex. And Pegasus might be the weapon of choice now, but it's the weapon of choice because it's precise and it can effectively collect this data. It's no different than anything else in the next product that's going to replace it. It's how are we viewing it, and who is going to be having this conversation of who we target.
Exactly.
I think with the Pegasus, first of all, the government of Israel really controls any cyber attacks tool and cyber offense tools. I mean, it's not a free export all over the world like some other products that the US has some export controls and Israel has export control. And I still believe that over 95% of the usage of Pegasus was for good cause. I mean, to catch terrorists and to catch criminals and to go after national security issues and stuff like this. In most of the countries that got it. But it always goes to the headlines when you have, the 1% that people misused it. And in this case, we are in deep trouble, because when the police, and by the way, now in Israel, they claim that the Israel police went after civilians, but now they just took back, and maybe it's not correct because it was some of the journalists that published it, but there's no evidence whatsoever. So it may be some noise, just a noisy environment. But anyway, it's a signal. It's a signal that this is weapon. And when you have a weapon in your hand, you need to know how to use it and against who to use it and against not to use it. And this is very, very sensitive issue. And I think that globally should be more control over these tools, because it's enough that one time you get to the wrong hands and they can do a substantial damage to everyone, to the community. So it should be controlled. It should be globally controlled in order that this weapon won't fall to hands that you really don't want to have it over there.
Absolutely. And when you look at China and the Olympics that are going on right now, there was an app that was kind of the focal point of security and do we really trust this app, and they were instructing athletes and people attending to download this app from a Chinese developer. Of course, the Olympics is in that country, so why would it be anything other than a Chinese application, right? So, but the FBI looked at it and said, athletes and people who are attending, please take a burner phone. We're not sure about this application. There's been a lot of research into it, and some people say, it's collecting data on people attending the games and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that application, the validity and potential risk of that app?
Well, we don't know much about what's going on in China. It's kind of a huge country that runs its own laws and goes on its own way. And it's not always, like we are familiar and aware in the West. So they're doing a lot of things in China and Russia that, sometimes violates human rights, and, everyone knows it. And I know that the US and other countries try to change it, try to struggle against it, and not always, there's a lot of sanctions on Russia, and but it won't bother them. And so I think that when you say that there is a global effort, it's the global efforts. It's for the countries that really have a kind of a statement between them, the way they want to control their lives, the way they want to live in democracy and other way of life. And some countries, maybe also some other tribes, countries, and so on, they're not really ready to join to this effort, because this is really it's a trust between countries, and you need to build this trust, and it can be broken very easily. One event and it's broken. So it's a really challenge.
Yeah, I agree. And especially with technology that comes out of China, there's been so many arguments to pull technical advancements, that the U.S. is making inside the walls of China to bring it back home and stuff like that. But I don't think that's the answer, and probably not the best effect with diplomacy either. So the U.S. is really looking at Russia right now and their advancement against Ukraine. And, of course, they have talked about, deploying troops. They've started that idea of pushing people, troops over to that region, but not specifically to the Ukraine. And it's a very, very unstable situation when it comes to diplomacy and protecting different countries. And I think that when we do see, if it happens, if Russia does cross the border into the Ukraine, which, there's intelligence now that is already starting to happen. I think we're going to see an uptick in cyber. I think that, the invasion is also going to bring on a lot of cyber activity. And Russia had plainly stated that if the U.S. intervened in that process, that they would target our critical infrastructure. And to me, that really, sounds an alarm. And it's like, do you really want to cross that line? And it kind of shocked me that they would even make that statement, if they made that statement.
It's Russia. Does Russia need to make this statement? It's not like they're going to send over chocolate milk. Like I've heard of them in the past.
Yeah, exactly. And people were shocked here, like, oh my God, they're threatening our infrastructure. I'm like, they threaten our infrastructure daily. If you look at all of the red states, as far as like the communist countries, Cuba, for example, has been recently caught in our infrastructure probing around. My theory is these countries have all been in the infrastructure. They've all planted their kill switches. But again, hitting that nuclear cyber button is just like hitting the nuke button in real life, and in the physical world. Because once you hit that button and take down somebody's, critical infrastructure to the point where they throw us back to 30 years, I think we're on that precipice of a global world war when it comes to cyber.
Mutually assured destruction. For China, the Chinese economy is so intertwined with America. I have many years in Chinese policy background before my time at Odix, and it's, as much as you see that threat and that posturing, does it make sense for China to cut off all the manufacturing to the States? You know, like, does it make, like, this needs to go to a market, and the Belt and Road has an idea where we're going to export this excess manufacturing and X, Y, and Z, but you need this player to be strong, and for the American economy to be strong and to be resilient, for you to have this balance and this complementarity. If you see it as this pure offensive foe, it doesn't work. And we see, like, Nixon engaging with China, all this economic collaboration. We can find a way to come over our political divides.
Right.
We can throw Russia under the boat. We could do whatever is necessary, but in the end, it's what's going to be most beneficial for our bottom line. And I think that if America was more politically and economically intertwined with Russia, there wouldn't be this tension. You see in Europe, because the gas lines are coming from Russia into mainland Europe, there's a lot more, shadow stepping. How are we going to make a political compromise versus America? I believe they've already bought Alaska. There's not so much on the plate. Where are we going to connect? And you can see how this makes impact across the board.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then you look at, just recently on the same lines of China, you look recently where the North Koreans launched a hypersonic missile and a series of missiles. And then the story came out that their internet connection, egress and ingress, had been pretty much shut down. And then the story evolves into this guy who, was upset about some North Korean hackers that stole some of his data, and he alone shut down their internet connection. And that came out of the U.S. And I was sitting there thinking, I did a poll on LinkedIn. I said, who do you think is responsible for the North Korean attack where they shut down the internet to their core? And everybody had their own ideas, it was probably a power failure. Somebody probably, messed something up in his misconfiguration. And then there were some people who said, probably US Five Eyes. But then the US came out after that and said, well, it's this one guy. We're not really sure who he is, but he took down the entire North Korean, government internet because he was upset. And I'm not sure if I buy that rhetoric. I don't know if I buy that story.
To try and embarrass the North Korea. I mean, it shows more for their political prowess that they don't need to take down the North Koreans. Some jerk with a laptop watching Squid Games can make it work. But I think that we know that, the budgets, they're not spending it on agriculture. They're spending on some basic level of cyber defense that you would need something more substantial than somebody with a gripe.
Right, exactly. And that was my thoughts. It was really convenient how the story came out. The man wasn't named, and basically it was one guy sitting at home. It was like a slap in the face to North Korea. Like, if he can do it, anybody can do it.
And this is connected to what I said previously about the source of the attack. So assume that the US government would admit that they did it and they actually shut down the internet. It's maybe for the North Korean, it's a cause to start a war. I mean, it's an active war. And maybe they will start launching missiles to the US or whatever. But now when it's in the dawn and nobody knows exactly who was the guy and who stands behind him, and you cannot say 100%. So it just, you leave it in there. So it's left open.
Yeah, it's that cat and mouse game that the U.S. has always played, that cloak and dagger espionage, where they hire a group or they hire an individual to carry something out. We've been really effective when it comes to overthrowing governments through coup, and it's not been traced back. The CIA is pretty infamous at doing stuff like that. And also, the leaking of tools that the government uses, like we saw the stuff being leaked, like Weeping Angel and stuff like that, into, realms like the shadow brokers and online, dark web brokers for those tools. And when that happened years ago, I thought, it's really convenient that it was leaked into these people's hands and disseminated around the world. It almost seemed like an intentional leak, and they blamed it on a contractor who had gone kind of rogue and then dumped it into the dark web. But I think that, a lot of countries are in that business of throwing those tools out there into specific people because they know who those tools will be used against.
So it's also the ultimate equalizer, where in countries where you don't have the budget, you don't have the large-scale military-industrial complex to be able to provide for this war, you just need some smart, dedicated people with a problem and a desire to get out of there to really motivate them to make a significant impact. And I think that that's something that it's almost like the American dream. Anybody could take down your adversary. All you need is just the skills, and it's a very scary thought that if you put the time in and you get connected to these hacker groups and build up the gravitas, you could do this. You could be the guy who takes down North Korea.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a scary thought, because at that point, everything that we've talked about as far as critical infrastructure and hitting hospitals and killing mass numbers of people, that could be in the hands of a group in Nigeria or, even in the US, and we can't control that. And I think that at some point, the world is going to have to sit back and say, look, cybersecurity and cyber threat is a global issue. No longer can we prosecute in specific countries and in specific courts. I think we're going to end up needing something like a global court where we have those laws on a global scale, and we set that precedence of, you do this is what's going to happen. And this is supported by every country that's part of the connected internet. I don't know what it's going to take to get to that point, but as a hacker,
for the International Criminal Court, we're talking about prosecuting people for war crimes. And I spent a bunch of time in The Hague, and not only is the court very flawed intrinsically, but trying to get jurisdiction and trying to get America, Russia, China to join it is almost impossible. So to think of that we're going to integrate something like, the red alerts from the international police, and then somebody's going to hold it accountable, because what we keep on saying is these groups keep on going back and forth from where are they valuable in the legal sphere for the government versus when are they a rogue player. And I think that that's what's really tricky, that you can't say that they're on one side of the law, because until we can know what a terrorist is, what a freedom fighter is, what's the future leader of this country versus somebody who's a digital tyrant, it's very, very difficult to lay down the law.
Yeah, and it's really convenient too, the way that we have the cyber law constructed in countries that prosecute and those that don't. And it's funny because as a hacker, we will choose where we launch our attacks from based on those laws. If I know that I can get away with an attack on North Korea from the US, that's where I'm going to commit that crime. If I want to attack the US, of course I'm going to go to a Russian network, because you have that protection. And I think the attackers are getting smarter when it comes to launching those specific attacks against countries. They're looking at the laws, they're studying the law and the prosecution and the precedence has been set in those countries. They're getting smarter about it. And I think that's a real problem as well. So,
yeah, I think it's fascinating when you see, I think that there's this idea of hackers wearing sweatshirts in basements, and not this perception that they're very, very intelligent. If you're looking up the law and trying to mitigate your criminal accountability, or you're taking this deeper philosophical approach and you're working with nation states, and it's very, very complex. And I think that we need to change our idea of who these people are, what their ambitions are, what they're looking for, and what's the long game. It's not just this financial motivation and the background that can lead people into illicit cybercrime is very, very nuanced and not so different than, the military cyber hero who's going to be guiding our defense.
Yeah, and you look at the Orange Man from the U.S. that was president for a while, and during the debates, he identified and described hackers as 400 pounds in their mom's basement, sitting behind a computer, and that is so inaccurate. I think the media and government, portrays the hackers as these guys who have no life and whatnot.
One's not more than 350 pounds, for instance. So I think that it's not a fair judgment. Myself, right. I'm 365, but we still have to be fair.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when I heard that, I was sitting in a hotel room. I was actually doing a pen test on site for a company, and I was watching the debates. When he said that, I thought, minimizing the idea and the identity of these skilled people is probably the biggest mistake you can make, because then the people hear that and they take that in and they're like, oh, we're not worried about hackers because there's some kid, in somebody's basement that's trying to cause trouble. And I think on the global stage, that identity and that persona does not resonate at all. Most skilled hackers are business people. They're PhDs. They have some sort of super intelligence when it comes to diagnosing and looking at the world as a whole. And I think as defense, in the US, I don't think that companies here take into account geopolitics. And that's why I focused on that this year, is because geopolitics plays a huge part in cybercrime, a huge part, not just, financial motivations by those, countries, but also, the politics between countries and the politics between groups and malware creation. Geopolitics plays a part in everything that we do in cyber, but nobody really pays attention to looking at that political tension, analyzing it, and learning the actors and trying to find ways to mitigate based on the information intelligence you get from that. So hopefully the world can change in that aspect and really realize that geopolitics drives a lot of what we see in every industry, whether it's banking, whether it's defense, or even cybersecurity. Geopolitics is evident, and it's the foundation of everything we do. So tell me about Odix and what Odix is doing now. And, it's been close to about 7 or 8 months since I spoke to you guys. A lot's happened, I'm sure. So catch me up.
Yeah, we are. In fact, when we saw that most of the world and the application go to the cloud and to the SaaS applications, we realized that there's a lot of collaboration apps and a lot of file transfer apps, and they're all SaaS, but all the current on-prem solutions, they are not suitable for this application. So in my vision is that we will be the industry standard for the SaaS application to protect all file transfer and file collaboration, all these things. We started with a firewall for Microsoft 365 Exchange Online, which works very well. And we see a lot of traction. We work in particular with the distributors and the resellers of Microsoft 365. And in fact, they bundle firewall with the 365. There is a very nice blog on Microsoft website about how Microsoft and Firewall and Odix protect the 365 users. So we have a lot of customers so far satisfied. We have several, case studies that they, we were able to create a single-click deployment product with, not really nothing, not effort for, maintenance, support, and it goes like that, very smooth, frictionless, seamlessly. And this is what the service provider like. They like to see how they can make money without, friction and without, spending a lot of time. So it's very easy to explain our added value that we provide to the Microsoft 365 security, either to the Defender, to the EOP. We complement the Microsoft 365 solution. So we don't claim to, take out Microsoft, or we don't claim that, we have any conflict with their security, but we complement their solution in order to have a really a nice secured solution, in particular against ransomware that resides within files and goes, sometimes many levels down in nested files. And most of the tools today are not able to go after this. But since we are doing a real kind of deep file analysis and break the files and look after everything that's moving inside and that is suspicious, so we are able to track these attacks that are multi-level and nested files attacks and all this, which today are very common, and hackers also look at this domain as well. So we really reduced the attack surface significantly for the 365 users. So yeah, we're moving forward, and it's very interesting. Our next product to release is the solution for Teams, because we see a lot of usage for collaborations tools and so on. So Teams is definitely the next candidate that will provide a solution.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've been following you guys quite a bit, and the relationship with Microsoft is huge. I was really happy to see that you guys were going that route. Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, as usual, and a really great conversation. And I think that when people see this podcast or listen to this podcast, it'll open some eyes and maybe bring some awareness to, things that they didn't take into consideration, and maybe look at their own company and their own operations and kind of, follow along. I wish you guys the best of luck, and please stay in touch. I'm sure that we'll have you back on soon. And good luck. And I appreciate you guys being on.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, man.
Cheers.
Bye now.
Bye.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we've got our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2022 event. This one features Harpreet Singh, who is the co-founder and co-CEO over at Launchable. Harpreet talks about picking the right battles to wage in your DevOps transformations. So he discusses DevOps, testing, AI, and how data, machine learning, and test automation can help organizations in 2022 and beyond. So it's a great, great presentation. Let's roll it now.
Good afternoon, everybody. So let's get straight into this. Let me introduce you to Ashok. Ashok is a VP of engineering with a fairly modern software company. It's the last week of the year. It's a cold winter night. Ashok and his team are working in the night to patch a release. This release has had customers churning during the pre-Christmas rush. As you can imagine, there have been few sleepless nights for him and his team. And all Ashok really cares about is a peaceful night of sleep and time with family on holidays. That said, there's something bothering him underneath it. This is not the first time they've had this kind of drill. And what's bothering him is he's questioning himself. Does he have what it takes to run a high-performing engineering organization? So as he looks at his upcoming year, he sees three problems on his radar. One, there is this constant and relentless set of deadlines that keep coming at him and his teams. In the world which expects delivery at the speed of Amazon, these deadlines are just a way of life. Now, because these deadlines come in often and his team is not sophisticated enough, there are production breakages and escalations, and they're always sort of running behind them. Now, he has his best people on pager duties, getting up in the middle of the night and answering these calls. But that leads him to his third problem, which is his dev teams are unhappy. So as he thinks about 2022, there are a few choices in front of him. One, he could just quit, go elsewhere, and do nothing about this, and no harm done. Two, he could start sort of worrying about and focusing on developer happiness. But what does developer happiness even mean? And why would he start there? Kind of get the attrition thing, but it doesn't solve his immediate problem. He's paid attention to DevOps, and he's seeing other teams actually running these sophisticated engineering team. So should he be looking into DevOps and AI? And if so, where should he even start? So luckily for us, he decides to move down the path of DevOps. And here we come in to provide him recommendations on where to spend his energy in 2022, right? And hopefully, if he does enough of what we tell him, he gets to the gnome Zen state of mind by the end of the year. So let's try to see what recommendations we give Ashok to kind of get to this state of mind. Now, as I said, Ashok has decided to double down on this existing efforts going on in the organization around DevOps. But today, DevOps actually means a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. So let's just go back to definitions and see what those actually means. So Gartner defines DevOps as a customer value-driven approach to deliver solutions using agile methods, collaboration, and automation. It further states that DevOps emphasizes people, culture, and collaboration between dev teams, operations, and other stakeholders to improve the delivery of customer value. What I think they miss is the lens of Kaizen, which is this Japanese word around continuous improvement. So in addition to these, there should be a relentless focus on driving improvements on these three vectors, and specifically around automation and collaboration. There's a lot that's been said in the last decade around Agile, so I'm not going to address that, and I'm going to head towards automation and collaboration in this talk. So if you back this up and look at the highest altitude, what should Ashok be worried about, right? So the thing Ashok should be worried about is to deliver the right value to the customer and deliver it at a superlative quality, right? It's like a chef preparing a dish. There's no point delivering a crappy dish earlier. The customer is not going to like it. There's no point waiting long enough and delivering a fantastic dish when the customer has lost his appetite. Now, this is somewhat counterintuitive, right? In the last few years, there's been this emphasis on pushing changes fast, but what ends up happening is that customers become testers of the solution. I remember the beginning of 2021, there was this incident of this unicorn company that pushed a change that broke all communications for its customers around the first week of January, and half of the world uses their tech. And I was one of them. So again, no point delivering features fast if they stop your customer from doing their work. All right, so if we keep this highest altitude in mind, the number one recommendation for Ashok is to move from a reactive to a proactive mindset, right? Now, too often, teams get addicted to reacting to crisis, jumping from one crisis to the other, right? You have individual contributors or heroes that are called to roll up their sleeve and save the day. Everybody loves this, but this is an addiction. So Ashok needs to break this. Then, to break this cycle, one of the next things you can do is to sort of go in and negotiate and get off the treadmill of relentless deadlines, right? So generally, product management teams are very receptive to engineering taking time, delivering features well, and are happy to negotiate. So that's the next recommendation for Ashok, is to go and renegotiate some of these deadlines. Now, assuming that Ashok's done this, he's got some breathing space to drive changes. Then we ask him to actually go in and start thinking about culture, because culture takes an outsized bite in the DevOps transformation efforts. Now, there's a diverse set of opinions on what working in the DevOps way means. In some companies, it implies letting every team do what they want to do and work with any number of tools. And on the other spectrum, you have people who have the desire to clamp down to one platform and one way of doing things. Whatever that is for Ashok's organization, Ashok should get there, right? So essentially find this common platform and find common ways of working. But this cannot be top down, right? This has to be sort of driven in some other ways. So lately we are seeing this evolution of a central DevOps team that also takes the role of a community organizer, or called communities of practice. And these enlightened teams take the responsibility of bringing in internal experts, people who are doing things really well, and sometimes external experts, and bring the best practices together and share it and actually build the tooling to get other teams to work together well. This is a practice that is well worth emulating even for small organizations and Ashok. Continuing down this path, we ask Ashok to provide a framework which lets his teams do deep work, right? So in the software world, we really need to think about what are the complex challenges we are facing, and solve for them. And what we have given to people is 30-minute meeting slots, and then sometime between those meeting slots to go and actually fix problems. That's not how things get done. So here's something that we at Launchable are using, and this is sort of our core practices on deep work that I will recommend to Ashok, right? Number one is you have to establish this culture of transparency. In the world, especially with COVID, everybody going remote, if somebody in some other time zone has to wait on me to sort of figure out what decisions need to be taken or to even get context, that is a problem. So you have to enable a culture where everything is open. And in that world, the second principle really counts. We've enabled a culture of writing matters. Now, what that actually means is we ask people to write cogent cases on whatever changes that they're driving. This is done on Confluence, but tooling doesn't quite matter, and is open to everyone. And everybody is expected to write these cases so that somebody in the other time zone can look at it and doesn't have to get on a call to understand the entire context. Now, the flip side of this is, the other side of this is, we actually expect readers to give enough thought to what's been written and comment on this and interact with this. So that's something Ashok and his team can emulate. Number three is we focus on a culture of async communications. We do not expect people to be on all the time on Slack or on emails. We expect them to actually consume this content that's been written earlier and comment on them, such that you can get most of the work done without getting on a face-to-face meeting. Now, we do have face-to-face meetings, but then those are very high quality discussions that are driving some content forward. On the same lines, we have a no email culture. So we only use email to interact outside our organization. All the other conversations are done internally on Confluence, right? So this helps drive no working out of the inbox culture. So that's great. I'm not getting my priority list from an inbox and email. And second, I don't have to hunt through for context in multiple emails during the day. And the third is email is exclusionary. So it sort of doesn't quite foster the culture of transparency. So unless you're on that email list, you're not going to see what's happening. So we do not allow that, right? The next piece that we do is we allow do what we call the get shit done days. So 3 days a week, you can actually not jump on phone calls. You're expected to sit down and push your thoughts forward, do some deep work. The next piece that we do is this notion of an automatic daily check-in, where you're expected to write what you've been working on a common company page. And this kind of replaces the water cooler in today's world. And so you can go in, write your, watch a line or two on what you work, and somebody else in some other time zone kind of gets the water cooler effect of seeing, Harpreet worked on this. That's quite interesting. And perhaps comment or engage. And the last thing that we do is we look for best practices in our organizations and turn them into katas. They're actually the same word, but kata is a more formalized approach in karate that says, keep practicing the best things again and again, and you get better at it. In fact, all the ones that I've listed here are katas that jumped out from the practices that we were using. So at this point, number 1, 2, and 3 recommendations help Ashok get to a place where he's enabling his organization to do deep work. He's done stuff culturally. The next thing he needs to look at the tools. And Ashok fairly quickly realizes there are hundreds, if not thousands, of software projects in his organization that exist at different levels of maturity, each with a corresponding set of choices in languages, in tech stack, and so on. So it's a diverse world out there, right? So how does he make sense of this world? It's kind of overwhelming. So one way to look at this is to see what analysts are recommending, right? So if you look at the Gartner hype cycle here, this is data from a year or two back, you'll start seeing they're talking to other people and see what they've been working on. So unless you've been not on Earth, you likely have, you've not seen, you've worked on cloud management platforms and container management and so on. So I'll skip through it. I've already talked about communities of practice. The next two sort of things that I will focus on for Ashok is sort of looking into the DevOps tool chains and continuous quality. So here Ashok comes in. One of the first things he can look at is to see the SDLC lifecycle. The logical approach here is to divide the SDLC lifecycle and look at the area that provides the biggest bang for the buck and choose it. And then in this world, there are a number of tools that are already being used, right? That's one way to go about it. But there's so many tools in the marketplace. They come and go. What was hot and relevant 3 years ago might have aged. So the key bit of information for Ashok here is to look at the small pieces of workflows or best practices that are already in his organization and standardize and automate around these jobs to be done. Once you do that, you have defined these sort of processes. Tools can come in and go. Existing tools can be plugged in or swapped in and out, right? Standardizing on these best practices workflows has a greater chance of driving long-lasting changes within the organizations because teams can now fit their tools in the process rather than work around tools, right? So assuming he wants to do this, one of the next recommendation is to just orchestrate his delivery pipeline. This is one of the most common jobs to be done in the organization. So analysts call these as DevOps toolchain orchestration. So there's been a huge evolution in the industry in the last 10 years around continuous integration and continuous delivery. And if you choose a tool that sort of helps you orchestrate this pipeline, you get to a place where you can start moving faster, right? You can start moving faster. You will not necessarily move faster. This is one of the fundamental pieces here. Again, if he looks at this, there are a number of tools out here. Where does he sort of go in? Now, one of the challenges that we've seen is that if you start down this path, often organizations spend months on cultural transformation, making changes to their pipeline with no immediate value to show. And that's where you kind of lose your other stakeholders. Remember, DevOps is about bringing other stakeholders in too. So let's look at what some of the organizations out there, how they solve and think about and prioritize this problem, right? So again, this comes from Gartner. They talk about sort of the top 5 DevOps controls are listed here, right? And the way I think about this is Activity logging, disaster recovery, traceability are after the fact controls, while quality and access controls are preventive measures, right? So within the preventive measures, quality is the one that defines your customer experience. This is where the customer sees whether she likes and engages with your product. And from Gartner's perspective, organizations are putting quality at the top of the pyramid to give better support for their customers. So the next recommendation is to start thinking about continuous quality in the workflow. What is continuous quality, right? It means bringing in cultural changes where quality is the responsibility of everyone in the team. It's part of the DevOps process, not an afterthought. It's not thrown over the wall to a team in India or elsewhere, right? And the idea is we should catch and mitigate risk as early as possible in the software lifecycle. And if we did that, we would delight customers with fewer defects. At the same time, our engineers would be happy because they are pushing high quality software. They are getting a faster feedback loop, so they can bring that in. So now, if Ashok goes down this list, again, he's faced a set of overwhelming choices. It's turtles all the way down, right? So if you drill further into this quality domain, it seems that one of the problems is only 34% of the tool chain is fully automated, and 26% is completely manual. That's a problem. Again, I'm quoting Gartner from a couple of years back, right? So a core concept in DevOps is automation, right? So if we can't make progress on this ladder with manual or semi-automated tests. The other two problems that we've seen at Launchable talking to customers is, one, they don't have enough tests. So they feel somewhat naked. And then on the other side, you have larger teams where there are too many tests and they're completely sort of in molasses trying to move forward. So let's take these three problems and see what our recommendation is going to be. So the next recommendation for Ashok is to start looking into automating testing. If he hasn't, he should be. Coming in from Gartner, there was another sort of data point that I found very interesting where the top two priorities for DevOps transformations in organizations was listed as moving to the cloud. So 56% of people were trying to get there, and 47% of the people were trying to get to automated testing. So Ashok's peers are already sort of headed down this path of automated testing, and that's what he should do. Now, he would be sort of wrong to think that once he gets this going, his continuous delivery infinity loop starts looking very smooth. What then tends to happen is that tests start becoming the biggest bottleneck in delivery, right? So you have lots of tests, trying to move them forward. The next question is, how do we become smart around this? So that's our next recommendation. So in this recommendation, we ask Ashok to start thinking whether his tests should move left or right. Now, if you think about it, the way test suites actually get built is you start off with like very light sort of unit tests, and over a period of time, you keep improving the tests and you adding them. And at some point you think, oh, I can't run this all the time. Let me shift them right. And over a period of time, you have like these series of tests like nightly, integration, weekly, or so on and so forth. So the question for Ashok here would be to see which tests can be actually moved earlier in the life cycle so that the devs get feedback faster. And the flip side of this is if I have some tests that are running way early in the cycle but are not providing enough signals, can I move them later in the cycle, right? This is easier said than done. And this is where actually Launchable has come in. So we start off with helping organizations push changes, organization push changes, and test change and run tests based on the changes that have come in. So we identify the right signal at the right time. This brings me to the next recommendation for Ashok, and that is start taking advantage of existing data and get towards a data-driven DevOps mentality. Look at how people are solving problems at scale. And once you do that, you can start looking at some data that exists in your pipeline today and then push that forward and make improvements based on that data, right? So we've done a whole bunch of talk and write-ups around it. So I would ask you to search for data-driven DevOps, Launchable, or Tech Beacon, and you see our thoughts around it. So what does sort of moving towards data-driven DevOps mean? It means that you need to start moving to smarter tooling. So in this graph, what you see is on the x-axis, you have the software delivery lifecycle. On the y-axis is the evolution of the tooling from craft to at scale to smartness. So where we are in the software delivery lifecycle is we've started solving problems at scale for the last couple of years. And now we need to start thinking about being smart about this. But if Ashok kind of gets in and tries to figure out what the recommendations from people out there are on becoming a smarter org, he's going to be stuck in molasses again. Here's some that I put out there after reading a couple of papers. And it was just, I don't know how Ashok would actually implement this, right? Kind of going out and hiring data scientists and applying them as QA strategists is unlikely going to happen given how sparse the expertise in this field is. So in this world, there are consulting firms that come in and try to help you sort of make sense of this world. So if you look at it, here's McKinsey that's talking about the complexity of various techniques and the likelihood of using them in AI applications. So at this point, Ashok's team needs to look at this and figure out which technique they need to use for the problems that they have. And McKinsey tries to help you there by actually coming in and saying, well, if you're in these industries, here are the sort of techniques that you could end up using in this world, right? The picture that I want you to get away from this is actually very complex, right? So Ashok should not go out and build an in-house practice if he doesn't have data scientists or AI specialists on the team that he can use, because building an AI and machine learning stack is complex, right? Data scientists are extremely hard to recruit. So this brings me to what the next recommendation for Ashok, which is to go and explore off-the-shelf specialist tools out there, right? So if you think about the top three QA problems that I talked about, was automating testing. And the number two was like, I feel naked, I don't have enough tests. This space, I do not have enough tests, has had some set of tools in there like Mesmer, Mabel, Test AI that are looking at your UI and generating tests for that world, right? So there's already tools out there, and Ashok can try some of those. Then if you're a larger organization or you have tests that are slowing you down, that becomes a field of test optimization and acceleration. This is where Launchable comes in. And what we have done is we've looked at some of the unicorn companies like Facebook and Google and seen like how were they kind of getting ahead of all the tests, the lots of tests that they have. And we sort of built a solution that can be used by organizations like Ashok, right? So again, just backing it up, Ashok should start looking into off-the-shelf specialist tools that can help him get and bring that smartness without actually having to build that today. So finally, coming to sort of summarizing how we want to take Ashok to that gnome state of mind and start sort of moving faster and have an organization that's nimble. One, and this is the highest altitude thing, is move from a reactive to a proactive culture. As part of this, start focusing on culture, which is start bringing in a center of excellence, communities of practice to share best practices around. Then provide a framework that lets teams do deep work and push meaningful changes forward. Number 4 then is to look at sort of the workflows and see what parts of the workflows can be automated today around jobs to be done. One of those jobs to be done is to orchestrate the delivery pipeline. Doesn't necessarily need to do the entire pipeline. Start with continuous quality, right? start with bringing quality as the highest emphasis in the organization and automate tests. Once he's automated tests, look at all the data that's coming out from various parts of the pipeline that he already has and embrace a data-driven DevOps culture, right? And finally, given the data, explore these off-the-shelf tools that can help him make smarter decisions. With that, hopefully, if he walks down these 9 steps, 2022 Christmas starts looking much better for Ashok. All right, here we are. I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at ML Ops and Data Ops and their relationship with DevOps. As software has become an integral part of every industry, we are seeing a monumental shift in the increasing adoption of AI. As AI gains acceptance and new use cases are rolled out, applications will only continue to become more intelligent. The widespread move toward ML-enabled software has the potential to be as transformative and far-reaching as the ubiquity of software itself. While MLOps requires a much tighter integration with data than DevOps historically has required, MLOps is not the same thing as Data Ops. This article looks at the ways in which each discipline supports the other and how every intelligent application depends upon them for the most optimal outcome. And we revisit the low-code impact on DevOps and the steady rise of citizen developers. Running a citizen development program doesn't mean relegating IT to the sidelines. Rather, citizen development calls for a new relational approach that's founded on transparency, trust, and dialogue between IT specialists and non-IT employees. Business leaders are in the best position to initiate such a program. This article offers up the steps organizations can take to get started in creating a citizen development program, including ways to identify and support citizen developers. In news, CircleCI has acquired Ponacode to gain control over a unit testing platform infused with artificial intelligence that makes it easier to review application code prior to uploading it into a build. The goal is to integrate Ponacode's testing technology within CircleCI's CI/CD platform. That approach will make it possible to apply algorithms to individual developers' code, as well as to code aggregated from multiple developers within a build, as it is continuously updated across a DevOps workflow. Ponacode launched in June 2020 as a JavaScript unit testing extension for Microsoft VS Code. Since then, the company has started to support TypeScript, Java, and Python, including complex functions such as variable mocking and infer suggestions of complex structures for nested objects. All right, over on Container Journal, we have news from Equinix Metal, which has added an API for provisioning clusters on bare metal servers to the Tinkerbell open source project. Tinkerbell is a bare metal provisioning engine used to install operating systems along with other types of software. The cluster API for Tinkerbell will enable an IT team to declaratively provision Kubernetes clusters and the underlying operating system directly on a bare metal server. In addition, support for Kubernetes types and controllers is also being added to enable Tinkerbell to interact with a Kubernetes cluster via the Kubernetes resource model. IT teams can then list Kubernetes resources, monitor resource changes, or manage role-based access control settings directly from Tinkerbell. Previously, IT teams relied on a Postgres backend to manage those tasks. Tinkerbell was originally created by Packet, which was acquired by Equinix in 2020 and now operates as the Equinix Metal arm of Equinix. And Solo.io announced updates to its Glue Mesh Enterprise Service Mesh that adds support for multi-tenant workspaces and improves support for virtual machines. In addition, the company announced a unified API for managing the platform and a user interface to improve observability. Solo.io also announced that its Glue Edge API gateway for edge computing platform now includes beta support for GraphQL-based APIs in beta and a natively embedded GraphQL server. According to the company, the updates reflect the need for more robust tools for managing Istio as more organizations start to deploy the service mesh in production environments. The Glue Mesh Enterprise Service Mesh is based on the open source Istio project. And on Security Boulevard, we look at how to protect your data in the age of the metaverse. It's exciting to explore new digital spaces and opportunities, and you can't talk about what's new with all things digital without also talking about the metaverse. Whether you're venturing into the metaverse for entertainment or professional purposes, there's a lot to learn and do. Is it safe, though? It's not yet known how much information things like virtual reality headsets can collect from users. The truth is, the metaverse could actually make it way easier for cybercriminals to steal information and take advantage of curious users who are just trying out something new. We don't think you need to avoid the metaverse altogether, though. In fact, avoiding it may become impossible in the coming years. This article offers up some of the potential issues of living in the metaverse and ways in which users can protect themselves. And SlashNet has launched a security platform that uses machine learning algorithms to identify and remove phishing attacks from email. The SlashNet email protection for Microsoft 365 provides real-time scanning, detection, and removal of threats before they reach users. The company claims it can deliver a 99.9% accuracy rate with a 1 in a million false positive rate. That capability stops 65% more links to spear phishing, business email compromise, malware, and ransomware threats than all other cloud-based email security services. Previously, SlashNet provided an email security service that removed phishing attacks after they had landed in an email inbox. This offering prevents those phishing attacks from ever landing in those email inboxes. The company plans to extend this capability to other email and social media platforms as well. And finally, we look at the importance of tabletop exercises in cybersecurity. The military is always on the cutting edge of technological and strategic innovations. And while they usually use war games to train personnel, these exercises can be difficult to schedule and expensive to execute. However, tabletop exercises where key personnel deliberate on various simulated emergencies or rapid response situations are cheaper, much easier to set up, and can be just about as productive as war games. Tabletop exercises improve a team's disaster preparedness, coordination skills, and role responsibility disruption under duress. And these exercises also help program managers identify deficiencies in cybersecurity process procedures, personnel shortcomings, and additional training requirements. This article looks at the importance of tabletop exercises and ways in which organizations can adopt tabletop exercises to simulate actual attacks to better prepare individuals for real-world scenarios. All right, that's it for the headlines today. Please check back with me tomorrow when I'll have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Karen Wurstel, who is the Senior Cybersecurity Strategist over at VMware. Karen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Great. I'm interested in talking with you about smart cities and specifically cybersecurity of smart cities. It's really kind of a fascinating topic for me because I've been talking about or, reporting on smart cities and writing about it for, almost 10 years now. And it seems like, the technology itself has improved dramatically and more areas are adding smart city technology to their infrastructure, but we're not talking a lot about cybersecurity when it comes to smart cities. So interested in talking to you about that and where you kind of see the market right now and what that means moving forward. So can we kind of do just like a lay of the land right now? What's happening in the smart city infrastructure area? And then we can kind of dive into the cybersecurity aspect.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to just sort of lay the groundwork because just for the understanding of what smart cities is truly trying to attain, with 70% of the world's population going to be living in urban centers by 2050, the idea that we can use technology as an opportunity to actually improve quality of life for people in urban centers everywhere. So it's about delivering services in a more equitable and just way. It's about making access to education, access to healthcare, access to, the services that and to improve environmental quality. Right there. So smart cities encompasses a whole lot of things, and I think that we're still sort of sussing out what that really means in terms of the way we're going to deliver the infrastructure. I think what is true, what is for sure, that we're going to be using a 5G infrastructure because the bandwidth for the delivery of this volume of traffic and the speed with which we need to have processing happen at the edge, all of that is going to be in place, I think, relatively soon. We have the ability to do now very specialized applications in the cloud. So if we do cloud native applications, we can do very fast DevOps to deliver services in new ways and get those out to people. We still have a lot of challenges to resolve in terms of the implementation of this across multiple municipalities. So if you take a look at Denver, like where I live, we have a whole collection of independent municipalities that make up what people would call metropolitan Denver. And they have separate ways of approaching, for example, their technology or their IT or their management. And so we have to kind of federate things together, and our infrastructure needs to accommodate differences as well as create commonalities to make smart cities viable, in these large urban centers.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge challenge for a city, for a municipality to undertake. And when you're talking about having, to connect these smart cities, these different municipalities, that is a big job. And I wonder if have we started it wrong? I mean, should we have kind of laid the groundwork for having a more of a kind of an open, blueprint, if you will, for having a smart city infrastructure, one in which we do know that that the cities can connect the services and the infrastructures to create a much more seamless environment. Or, I know 5G is going to help a lot, but it's not the cure-all.
Well, there's groups in telecom, for example, with ORAN that they're working to create a more open environment so we don't end up getting locked into all these proprietary solution sets. And to be honest, I think there was a lot more momentum towards smart cities until COVID hit, and then all of the resources in every municipality everywhere went towards handling the pandemic. So we've had a little bit of a pause. It feels like a pause to me anyway. And I think one of the things that we can look forward to is in the meantime that the technology has advanced. We now have like a multi-cloud, a true multi-cloud solution set where we can operate in multiple clouds and have a seamless infrastructure between them. That is new, and that's going to be helpful. So I think we've gotten more advances in the technology that'll help us move forward. Now, what we need are a lot of demonstrations and proof of concept and broad, I would say, test labs, innovation labs, where we're pulling these things together in a collaborative way, where we're demonstrating the IT, OT, and the security aspects of everything that's out there on the edge that's necessary for the implementation of these smart cities. And then how are we going to manage that back in the back office, like across the far edge, the edge boundary, and into our cloud infrastructures where the apps and everything are residing. So we have a lot of stuff to figure out, but I think that way that's going to happen is by groups coming together and showing, the viability of this and getting some early adoption and moving these things out into, real world.
I would imagine that the pause, to your point, the pause that we experienced with smart cities because of COVID has kind of actually given organizations and municipalities time to really think harder about how they're going to, hopefully thinking about how they can better secure these infrastructures. And really, if the COVID lockdown has taught us anything, it's that no company is immune to cybersecurity threats and ransomware and just the level of cybersecurity activity that has been going on since the beginning of the pandemic has really shown the spotlight on cybersecurity within organizations and the need to make sure that they do have end-to-end security. So I wonder if as these smart city efforts start to ramp up a little bit more, if there is going to be, or if either going to be or actually happening now, a bigger and much more extended conversation about cybersecurity and making sure that by implementing these smart technologies that they're actually not setting themselves up for a massive cyber attack.
Yeah, the last couple of years, a whole lot changed. So now we have workforce and at home, right? It has changed the dynamic in the city tremendously. We learned a lot of things during the pandemic. We learned about the need for being able to create equity access to technology because we saw real world examples of school children who are sent home with the assumption that they're going to use a computer and have access to the internet. And they're trying to do all of their schoolwork from a mobile phone because they don't have that. So we've learned a lot more about the way the world operates and where equity really needs to be paid attention to, right? So there's a motivator there for delivering and getting smart city services out there. We also saw a gigantic uptick in cybercrime, as you mentioned. And so now we understand, like, we live in a 0-day world. If there is something that we're deploying out there and it's going to open an avenue into a city infrastructure, it is absolutely going to be exploited. There's just no question. The idea that we can deploy things insecurely like we used to do and then patch them later is a non-starter. No. So there is more attention being paid to this. That there's more urgency in trying to get services out the door and figure out how to make this happen. We really need them. And at the same time, we now know you can't just rush them out the door. They have to be deployed with security in place. That's just I don't even think that's a debate anymore, which is new.
It's really good to hear. Yeah. So where do you think we are on smart city adoption? As more organizations and more municipalities actually tend to the idea of they understand that the importance of these smart technologies and helping them basically improve the standard of living for all of its citizens and residents. But where do you think we are on that adoption curve? And do you think that that cybersecurity is becoming more of a topic of conversation among these smart cities, the organizers of the smart cities?
Well, I will say for the projects that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there's many out there that I don't see, but that there are right now there's like proof of concepts and demonstrations of capabilities that are happening in like very specific use cases, like free and low cost transportation. There was a project that was deployed last year here in Golden, Colorado for transportation between campuses and at the School of Mines and other locations within the city, all in self-driving autonomous vehicles. That's a smart city project. Looking at I'm using Colorado examples, but the My Colorado app, which is an app that holds all of our documents securely, in order for us to be able to pull up whatever required identifications are needed in different venues. That's another smart city application use case. Having a like full-blown smart city application or series of applications that cover all use cases, we're not anywhere close to that. But I think we're making progress. What I'm really looking forward to is these collaborative efforts between the public sector and the private sector, like big companies, who are going to bring the technology and help the public sector, like the Colorado Smart Cities Alliance as an example, pull together these demonstrations together with the universities who are involved and try to make these labs where we have the use cases using the 5G infrastructure come to life, and that we can demonstrate what are the new threats that we might, and the vulnerabilities in this environment that we might need to be dealing with, and then having those built in with solution sets from the get-go. Because there's a challenge there, right? We have done a lot of work on endpoints. There's just a ton of good work out there right now for managing endpoints in enterprise environments. Mm-hmm. When you go to smart cities, we're dealing with OT and IT devices that are managing our electrical grid, or they're managing our water supply, or a variety of different things that we haven't really integrated the security that's needed and the engineering that's needed for the security and safety of those environments, and have a way where that kind of seamlessly integrates across that boundary at the edge of the network, mm-hmm. so that we're managing everything seamlessly, or have visibility of everything, and we understand what the threat vectors are out there, and we're doing something about them. So there's projects that are needed to be able to show how that's all working. It's a kind of a new frontier. We're just expanding the edge to billions of new devices that generally have been not deployed with security built in. And now we have to figure out what to do with that. And so there's quite a bit of work, I think, that needs to be done before we see wholesale smart city use cases in action everywhere. And we're going to, basically work to get these proof of concept projects running so that we can learn from them and figure out how to do large scale deployments. What does smart city look like at scale?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think it's great technology. There are so many unknowns, though, and we're talking about IT and OT, operational technology, that traditionally hasn't really been connected to the internet. It's been kind of this castle and moat, deal where there was no chance of getting in and actually being able to attack the infrastructure because it really wasn't connected to anything. But that's changed over the last couple of years. So there's definitely been a movement to connect everything, and obviously that does introduce a level of vulnerabilities that didn't exist. And when we're talking about an entire network that is connecting everything from the trash can on the corner to the municipal buses to your handheld device, it can be scary if the cybersecurity isn't well thought out, because bad things could happen. So I'm really interested in keeping up with what is happening on the smart city front and learning more about it as we go along. So Karen, I hope we can have future conversations about smart city technologies and the ways, hopefully, it will help improve our way of life, whether we're in an inner city, Uber city, or living out in the burbs. So good stuff there. Thank you so much, Karen. I do appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you we have so many great webinars coming up. We have got 3 that are coming up this week, either on DevOps.com, Container Journal, or Security Boulevard. It's up to you to check out which ones they are, but they're all good ones, so I hope you can join us for them. Please do mark your calendar. The first one is called Solving the Work Anywhere and Access Everything Security Challenge. This one is happening Wednesday, March 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Menlo Security. With more than half of employees now working remotely and many expecting this to last at least for a year or so, the way companies organize and implement their security operations must also change as to meet the needs of their end users without compromising security. So this webinar will discuss how remote and hybrid work has impacted your end users, security, and IT teams, how to implement effective threat prevention, and different strategies for working smarter, not harder, when deploying security controls. All right, the second webinar is called Scaling IAC, Terraform, Ansible, and GitOps with Infrastructure Pipelines. This one is happening Thursday, March 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This webinar aims to elevate your infrastructure as code game, from tool silos to integrated infrastructure pipelines. Specifically, it will provide some concrete solutions for enterprises adding Terraform and Ansible orchestration and enabling platform teams to create a unified self-service API. We will describe how using an infrastructure as code platform delivers a consistent control approach for multi-cloud infrastructure pipelines. All right, the final webinar today is called Adding DevSecOps to Detect and Protect Your Organization's Workspace. This one is happening Tuesday, March 22nd at 11 a.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This one is a really good one. This one is all about how to protect an organization's workspace, and it is a good one. Enterprises are scrambling to get a handle on data breaches, source code vulnerabilities, and software supply chain issues that have the potential to wreak havoc on an organization's software delivery pipeline. Traditional security implementations revolve around perimeter security posture rather than from within the application. But having perimeter security measures in place, even having perimeter series security measures in place, recent security breaches have exposed the fact that security involves paradigms that go far deeper into the application stack. So this webinar will focus on how to identify, protect, detect, and respond to application security issues across your organization's work streams by instrumenting the Contrast security platform within the VMware Tanzu ecosystems. This one is definitely one to check out, folks. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a fresh new batch. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. Please, whatever you do, stay safe.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, we are back, and rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we've got The View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard is speaking with Vijay Pandey, who is the Vice President of Emerging Technologies and Incubation over at Cisco. They talk about why automation has become an absolute IT necessity. Great conversation, great topic. Let's roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Vijay Pandey, who's Vice President of Emerging Technology and Incubation for Cisco. And we're going to be talking about all things related to automation. Vijay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
Right now, everybody is struggling looking to find people, hire people, retain people. And this was an issue before COVID came, but it seems like it's much worse these days, and there seems to be no end in sight. So what is your best advice to folks about how to think about managing talent these days?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty important point you raised there, Mike. I think just like everybody else, we've been seeing not just news articles around the Great Resignation, but also we're feeling that inside of Cisco as well. So, and we know that our partners, our customers, all of us are feeling that pinch where it's incredibly important to retain talent, but it's also very hard to find talent given the trends that we're seeing around us. When you think about cloud computing, when you think about AI, ML, all of those things. So we think of the problem in a very different way. We think that, and we've done a bunch of surveys inside of Cisco, what we realized was, given the global nature of events, we know some events are unfolding right now, and all of the geopolitical events happening or the pandemic, people really are realizing that life is too short. And it's not a pithy statement here. It's actually people believe that life is just too short, and they actually want to do meaningful work. They want to make an impact, not just to the team that they are with, not the company that they're with, but even a global impact with the work that they do. But they also want to grow and learn and make sure that they are on a path themselves towards meaningfully improving their own lives. So I think those are pretty important characteristics that we've at least gathered. And as organizations and as teams, we need to harness that desire to make both local impact as well as global impact, as well as figure out how to drive meaning into everybody's personal lives, yours, mine, our teams, and so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of things that we are doing inside of Cisco to make sure that this meaning or meaningful impact is nurtured. And one of the things that we keep on saying is that, yes, there is a business to run, but there's also an avenue we need to give our employees and our teams to innovate, to look at impact beyond the run-of-the-mill business that any corporation needs to do. So typically what we end up doing is we end up taking problem statements that we face, let's say as a team or an organization, and we start splitting it into buckets. So think about buckets that deal with run-of-the-mill business, because that you need to absolutely take care of. But also there are buckets that you need to innovate around or do meaningful work around. And so we have a portfolio management system inside, at least of my team, that says, let's take 60% of your time and make sure that that's allocated towards run-of-the-mill, business as usual projects. And then maybe 30% of the time, which is future looking and adding new features or looking at new markets and so on and so forth. And maybe 10% of your time is actually towards growing yourself, nurturing yourself, or making some meaningful impact in the global, on the global stage. So that's at least how we've been viewing the problem.
Early on, I think a lot of people were intimidated by automation, and there was concerns that people might lose their jobs. And now I wonder if we've flipped that entirely, where people are saying, hey, I don't really want to work for organizations that don't have automated IT processes in place because of your points. There's just things that I don't want to spend my day doing anymore. So has the whole conversation flipped as far as automation is concerned?
I would say the conversation is flipping as we speak. And I think, going back to the previous comment, yes, people don't want to spend time on repeatable tasks, on things which a computer can do better than you and I can do. I have this constant struggle with my kid nowadays as to why do I need to learn grammar when there's Grammarly? But that's a different matter. But I think it's a similar mindset going through every individual in the workforce as to, am I really adding value in the workplace? And am I being more productive? Which in turn translates to, is the organization being more productive, which in turn translates to, is the economy and the country being more productive? So I think the bump towards productivity is definitely a goal that people are more concerned about. And you hear the other side of this, which is, as you pointed out, is the digitization of the workplace, is a digitization of all economy that's in progress. And we've called that using various phrases. Software eating up the world, or the API economy, or whatever term that you want to use. But we are moving towards a world where software is critical in driving everything that we do. Software in terms of automation or even beyond that is definitely key to whatever we do.
Not too long ago, we all thought we'd be running around in flying cars by now and that IT would be easy. We've seen neither. And it looks like IT is getting more complex than ever. So my question to you is IT getting to the point where it is just too complex to manually deal with, and we need automation because we are seeing all these microservices, serverless frameworks, there's all our existing monolithic applications, it's distributed all the way out to the edge now, or we reach some sort of inflection point?
Yeah, I think to your point, IT is definitely way more complex than it was like even a decade ago. And I think the crux of the matter is that the way you are building applications and all of the digitization that we talked about is actually taking place in a very, very distributed manner. So as an application developer, first and foremost, we at Cisco like to say that the application is your brand. So if I'm a bank, how my customers interact with the apps that I build defines me, my company, my bank, as the brand. Because if Bank A has more capabilities in their software, their mobile app versus Bank B, I will migrate towards Bank A. So I think the application is becoming the front end to everything customer experience is all about. So if you take that notion and play it out, that means the application developer that is developing those applications is under extreme pressure to deliver velocity behind features, to deliver trust with the data of the customers, to deliver uptime and security and so on and so forth. So which means that they are picking and choosing all of these APIs that exist anywhere to make their job faster, easier, more secure, more trustworthy. And so if you think about that kind of an environment, as a developer, I'm picking APIs from cloud providers, SaaS providers. I have legacy systems. I have transactional systems. I have edge devices. In the case of a bank, it might be sitting on a branch office. I have all of these APIs and systems that I need to interface with just to build one particular app or feature. So in this kind of a distributed environment, think about the IT, poor IT people, right? I mean, it's like I'm trying to build a platform that caters to this kind of demands. And so it is definitely getting more complex, it's getting more distributed. And every provider in this distributed environment has their own semantics, their own lifecycle management behind their APIs and their infrastructure. So automation, I mean, it's just humanly impossible to not just deploy, but even manage and observe such a highly distributed manner and secure, by the way, such a highly distributed system. So automation is key to doing all of this. And automation to me is discoverability, it's intent-based, it's security, which is there's no longer a perimeter security, and it's observability across all of these endpoints, API to infra. And that is like key to moving forward.
Mm. Do you think as we go along that organizations, at least some of them I talk to, it's almost like a chicken and an egg kind of issue, right? They have so much legacy stuff that can't be automated that they can't invest in automation and they can't necessarily buy all new platforms tomorrow. So how do we get over the automation hump to kind of get from point A to point B without necessarily breaking the IT budget?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I think some of that I've dealt with in my previous lives as well. And the way to do that is, I mean, there's no question about it that for some period of time, there is going to be more chaos and more money spent than before that time or after that time. So we just have to acknowledge that as vendors, as customers, as organizations, that for some period of time, there is going to be turmoil. And that's the way, at least I've handled it in the past, where you say, let's put milestones, where we say, maybe we look after a pocket of the organization and say, we're going to build this out in a highly automated, distributed, cloud-first, API-first manner. This part of the application, this part of the infrastructure goes and does that. And to do that, we're going to do a clean slate process here. So we'll think about, we won't get ourselves bound to organizational boundaries, skill set boundaries, and it's very hard to do because people's jobs, people's skill sets, organizational structures, all of that are at stake. But we have to try in some pockets and then give ourselves strict guidelines and metrics and try and meet those metrics. And if we meet those metrics, the resulting outcome is that I will be spending less moving forward than I'm spending today. So I might spend a little bit more in getting maybe SREs or software engineers and marrying them up with IT folks or architects and getting something going. And I'll give myself a timeline of, let's say, a year or 18 months. It cannot be longer than that. Otherwise, it's a science project. But after those 18 months, these are the metrics I'm going to come back to. I'll get X% improvement in productivity and Y% reduction in headcount, let's say. And we should measure ourselves to that objective. And I've seen that work. And if it works, and start with something simpler, but go all the way. Don't go 80%. Let's not do 80% automation or 80% of the use cases. 100% automation, 100% of the use cases for this pocket of your environment, and then grow that out over time.
We, of course, hear a lot about artificial intelligence and AI ops. Are the machines going to save us from ourselves? What's the reality of AI?
To me, AI is a tool just like all of the other tools that we've talked about, which is we've talked about automation or infrastructure as code. We've talked about cloud native and serverless and microservices. And each one of these tools, programming and scripting is a tool. So all of these tools bring in something to the table. And infrastructure as code brings in consistency and intent-based infrastructures, and serverless and microservices. Our cloud native bring in immutable architectures, and the fact that you can grow and scale out and do all of those things, and availability goes through the roof and velocity goes through the roof. Similarly, AI and ML bring in insights to the table where it was humanly, again, impossible to do that just by looking at the vast variety of data and the deluge of data coming our way. If we could just take all of that, and it's all unstructured. So if I could take all of that and somehow put it in a structured database and somehow make sense of it as an individual, sure, we don't need AI or ML. But if I need to take all of that unstructured data and make some sense out of it, there's no other way out. I do need AI and ML. I do need some statistical mechanism first to figure out and make some sense out of it. I do need AI, ML, maybe deep learning to make some sense out of it. But then I need to marry that tool with subject matter expertise. I need to marry that tool with what I, as an individual or as humans, we've learned in the past. Because AI doesn't have that context. Yes, we can do learning, all sorts of learning, but it doesn't always work in all kinds of environments. So we need to marry that with subject matter expertise with some boundary conditions. And then we need to marry it with actions, because AI ML is going to give us insights, but somebody needs to take actions on the insights. So to me, it's a tool in the toolbox, and we need to leverage it when it makes sense. We need to rely on subject matter expertise when it makes sense. And eventually, things will get to a point where we need to go to the next level of abstraction. So it's always a game of moving that level of abstraction higher and higher. And that's what we are after. So maybe someday there will be flying cars and robots that will take over our jobs, but not right now.
How do I bridge this divide in IT that maybe we don't talk enough about, but there's clearly a DevOps community that's very programming centric. They use APIs, and then there's traditional IT administrators that use ITSM tools. They tend to be more graphical in nature. As we move forward with automation, do you think that those two camps are going to converge, or how will this all play out?
In my opinion, I think they have to converge. And I think each one of those pieces have they have their space in the hierarchy of things. And one of the things I learned pretty early on in one of my previous lives is, what good is a dashboard if you cannot take an action on it? So if you think about all dashboards that exist today, eventually there is data being presented in a certain way about a certain problem so that somebody can look at that and take an action. And if you think about infrastructure as code, is exactly that. Is basically, let's remove the dashboard and let's figure out what those triggers are that allow me to take those preset actions. And let's try and remove the action of a human looking at a dashboard, thinking about it, and taking some action on it. Now, again, I'm describing utopia, but I think that's where, as engineers, as operations folks, we all need to move towards. And to me, dashboards are a good start when the problem is less well understood. As we understand the problems better, we need to move towards code. And dashboards will still have their play in helping us understand more and more complex problems. But as problems are better understood, they need to move towards code. And that's the way, at least, I think through it.
All right. So automation needs to be our new North Star, as it were. Hey, Vijay, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and enjoyed our conversation.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
All right, that wraps up today's Techstrong TV broadcast. Hope you enjoyed today's conversations as much as I did, and I enjoyed bringing them to you. We have some live events coming up. Want to let you know about. They are great ones. I sure hope you can join us for them. The first is a series of Techstrong live events that we are kicking off in Atlanta at the end of this month. On March 29th, we have DevOps Cloud Native Live. It is a one-day workshop-style event. The morning is dedicated to presentations, kind of conference-style presentations. The afternoon is dedicated to hands-on learning, and it is a great, great event. We've got a great lineup of speakers for that one-day event. Do hope you can join us for that one. March 30th, we've got the same format in Cybersecurity Live. Again, a morning dedicated to presentations and conference-style presentations, and then the afternoon is going to be some super duper hands-on stuff. We are looking forward to both days. We're looking forward to seeing you in Atlanta if you're able to join us. We have in April 13th and 14th, we're doing the exact same thing, but in Washington, D.C. And then throughout the year, we have these two one-day events kind of scattered throughout the country. So I do encourage you to check out TechStrongEvents.com for the full lineup, as well as the other live and virtual events that we have going on throughout the year. One of note is the InnoTech conferences. Those are regional IT conferences. We've got one kicking off in Austin, I believe, in April. Then we've got Dallas and Houston, Oklahoma City, Washington, D.C. Those are going to be held throughout the year. It's going to be a great, great lineup throughout the year. Do hope you can join us for those as well. But please, as I said, just go to TechStrongEvents.com. Check out our full lineup of both the in-person events and our virtual events. We got a lot going on, folks, so I hope you can join us for at least one or two, hopefully all of them. We'll see. Anyway, I will be back tomorrow with a brand new Techstrong TV broadcast for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.